Hi, I'm Maria C. Palmer, and I live right outside of New York City, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today, we are going to talk about one moment that changed my life. A knock on my door whenever I was 20 years old. It was the federal government looking for my father, whose name was mentioned in a federal grand jury investigation. I grew up during the 80s and early 90s, which was a super cool time to grow up. My father always was a really big dreamer. He was a postal worker and he left his job at the post office to buy a failing business in a small little suburb of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that no one's ever heard of until recently. It's called McKees Rocks, and it was the area, if you're a football fan, growing up, whenever my dad bought that business, McKees Rocks is not really an area that you are flocking to as a tourist. So he turned this failing spot into one of America's hottest restaurants. And we had celebrities, Jamie Lee Curtis, Pat Sajak, Danny Aiello, Tommy Lasorda. I was 20 years old. At night, I would work for my dad as a waitress. One day I was in between jobs. I was literally changing out of a bathing suit and changing into a server's uniform to go to the restaurant, and my doorbell rang. And I answered it. It was two members of the federal government asking where my father was. And to be honest with you, I didn't think anything of it. I know that's going to sound strange, but I thought that they were asking where he was because they wanted to question him about somebody that he may have known. And so I said, he wasn't home, and I told them to go to his restaurant. And then I called my dad and gave him a heads up, and my dad said, oh yeah, just send them down here. Had no idea what this was about. Whenever they got down to the restaurant, they sat down with him. I found out about this afterwards, and they were questioning everything about the business, about his lifestyle, about the company that he was keeping. And it was exposed that somebody had mentioned his name in a federal grand jury investigation. And basically what that means, if you're just a lay person listening to this, laws have changed now in the last 20 years. But at that time, if somebody mentioned your name in a federal grand jury investigation, it automatically becomes a criminal investigation. We didn't know that at the time. And at the time, whenever I was at home, I didn't really think much of it until I started to call down at the restaurant. And it had been 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And after about 3 hours, I realized that something was probably wrong. What happened from then on, you never want to get on the bad side of the federal government because they have a 99.9 or 2% conviction rate. So it was a 3-year invasive investigation of my family, my father, the business, which eventually led to my father pleading guilty to tax evasion charges and going to federal prison. That moment really changed the course of my life. We went from being the family that everybody looked up to and admired and wanted to kind of have into their circle to being that family that, people maybe said something about behind our backs or avoided us, or they were scared to associate with us because they didn't want to be next in line. And that was very hard to take for somebody that was 20 years old. So I hopped on a plane and went to Los Angeles because everybody knows that if you hop on a plane, that your problems don't follow you in your carry-on luggage, right? I was so naive at the time and really didn't realize. But those problems certainly did follow me to LA. And I remember when I got to LA, I wanted to just start this new path of life where I could just have this fresh start and nobody knew about my family or the case or anything. And I could just be me. But the problem was I couldn't be me because I thought inside that there was something wrong with me that was detectable to the naked human eye, even if you had never met me. So what started to happen whenever I went to LA is I became almost very reclusive, and I consider myself quite a friendly person. I didn't want to talk to people or to even say hello because I really thought that people would say there's something wrong with that girl, because in my gut I felt that there was something wrong with me. I just did not feel grounded. I felt like my entire world was flipped upside down, and the wonderful life that I had always led just sort of stopped whenever something very traumatic happens in your world. Many people describe it as going in slow motion or feeling like you're almost having an out-of-body experience. And for me, that was my everyday basic tasks, like going to a restaurant and hearing a long list of specials ended with me crying and running out of the restaurant. And I am a kid who grew up from age 4 inside of a restaurant. There's no more comfortable place for me than inside of the walls of a restaurant, normally eating some amazing food. That in itself was disconcerting. And I was very lucky to have a wonderful boyfriend, now husband, who knew that the way that I was living my life was not going to work and that I needed a change. And so he had encouraged me to go to a meeting at a church that he was seeking out in the middle of Beverly Hills. And I told him I didn't think I wanted to do that because at the time Beverly Hills had just been in the news because Winona Ryder had shoplifted something. And I walked in, I put my head down, I sat in the back, and this wonderful eclectic nun in plain clothes struts up to the microphone. Her manicure matched her pedicure. She had wedge heels on. She was friendly as all get out, reminded me of the personality of my father in a female. Just said whatever she wanted to say, was so welcoming and wonderful. I didn't think that she was the nun. I thought she actually was somebody at the church. And she started talking about Get on the Bus, which was a program that she started originally because she was going to visit women in prison. And she decided she wanted to take a delegation of women, volunteers, to go visit the other women in prison. And the women went around the room and said, well, why would we want these random volunteers to visit us whenever we never see our own children? And she said, you don't see your children? How long has it been since you've seen your children? And it had been between 4 and 17 years since these women had seen their children. And she started this program to take kids to go see their incarcerated parents. First once a year for Mother's Day, and then once a year for Mother's and Father's Day. And now it's a more regular situation because the state has also adapted it. And afterwards, I just felt so compelled. I was not public at all with my story, especially in LA. I was trying to kind of get away from that identity in Pittsburgh because it was just too painful for me. And I just walked up to her and I said, listen, you don't know me. I think you're amazing. And I want to tell you my story. And I've never told anyone my story. And she listened, and immediately she said, you and I need to be together. And I would love if you could speak on behalf of children with incarcerated parents, because I can take you to South Central, but I can also take you to Beverly Hills, and people can relate to you in different ways in those different areas. And so that's how our relationship started. And I started speaking on behalf of her organization, doing, basic homilies and stuff after the Sunday services. And it made me feel so good because I was able to make money with my story that caused me so much pain for this beautiful program that allowed other children. I was 20 years old whenever this first happened to me, but there were kids that were 5 and 6 and 3. And I was able to allow those kids to be reunited with their families. And that was a beautiful thing. And what stemmed from there is the director quit on a whim. and we were sitting at a gas station in Burbank. I said to her, "What are you going to do now that the director quit?" And she said, "Well, I have somebody else in mind for the job." And I said, "Well, who?" And she said, "You." And I said, No, not me. I'm just out of college. I can't run a statewide organization. I don't know how to do this. This is not my skill set." And then she did the greatest blessing and also probably the greatest curse and used the line, "It will be easy. Nothing in life is ever easy." I decided that I would try to do it. And I thought what was going to happen in the process, I thought it was going to help so many families. And I thought that I was going to be this conduit that brought people to see their children. And really, yeah, that is what happened to a small extent, more through the volunteers that worked for me. But really what happened is that organization and the families that I served taught me how to love unconditionally, how to not be shameful about something that's happened in the past that you can't control, how to pick up the pieces and move on, how to maybe not like everything about the people that we love, but still to be able to embrace those flaws, because as humans, we all have a certain amount of duality, right? We have these things that are fantastic about us that we want to talk about, and then we have these darker sides of us that people just don't want to talk about. And it was so empowering and so freeing, and it set my entire path for the rest of my career. It inspired me to write the story about what happened to our family, actually in my father's voice, with my former AP English teacher, Ruthie Robbins. We write On the Rocks, which is a bestseller, has won several different awards for the voice. We are two females and we write as my dad. And I think part of what makes this book a very compelling book is, yes, we tell about all of the fantastic personality qualities that my dad has, and that he is so warm and welcoming and gregarious and the life of the party and the center of everybody's attention, and just the person that welcomes you wholeheartedly into his restaurant. But we also talk about the other side, and we talk about what happened, what led to everything that kind of crashed, and what you do whenever something in your life happens that A, is a little bit beyond your control, and B, it knocks you back. And how do you learn from that experience and pick up the pieces and go on? And I think that is what has resonated with so many people, is they love to see that there is an other side to whenever you go through something really tough. And if anybody's listening right now and they feel like their life is tough or this is the worst day of their life, it doesn't get much worse when the federal government is knocking on your door and asking for your family member, and then they go to prison. It really doesn't get much worse. But that in itself has been a beautiful blessing. And I tell my dad every day, without that, we would never have had this story. Because as I said, it is the beauty of what makes us human and what makes us relatable. And everybody struggles, but it's about trudging through that mud. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room to be the most successful, but you do need to be the most resilient person. And that is the story that I have taken away from this really challenging day in my life. And it's been an inspiration for me ever since. And it's made our family stronger. This book has created a lot of healing for everybody. And, the way that we once were, whenever I described at the top of the hour, the family that everybody strove to hang around and to look up to, we are that family again. And it's wonderful to be able to give that to my dad in his final chapter. It really is. I always tell people the incarceration piece wasn't the hardest part. It was everything up until then. Because, in life, we can deal with anything that's tough if we know what's in front of us. It's if you don't know what's in front of you that's when it becomes incredibly challenging. That's when your anxiety sets in. That's whenever you have all of these what ifs, or how am I going to deal with this? Or what if, this happens or that happens? That type of chaos is something that I never want to be in again, if possible. He sold it right before he went to prison, and somebody else took it over. The doors closed officially, I want to say right around 2008, 2009. But as a result of the book, two really cool things have happened. The first of which is I've been doing these cooking-inspired book talks. I call them cooking books. So it's an hour and a half of hands-on cooking and an hour and a half of enjoying whatever it is that we make, and then a book talk with me. And if it's in Pittsburgh, my dad comes, my mom comes, my sister comes, Ruthie comes as well, my co-writer. So those are a lot of fun. They are very popular. And we just got this amazing partnership with Vandura Kitchens and Countertops in Irwin, PA, which is about an hour east of Pittsburgh. So we actually recreate the restaurant on a biannual basis. 50 seat capacity, stadium style seating, open 8,000 square foot kitchen with 3 jumbotrons and many different stations. It's a BYO, and we pick 4 items from the Prima Donna menu, and it's a tasting menu, and it's an incredibly fun night. My dad comes and tells all kinds of stories. We cook live. People can ask us whatever they want to ask us. We open it up to the audience, and they can tell their favorite prima donna stories, which are always a fun surprise for us because we think we know all of the ins and outs, and really people have their own stories and memories and funny moments and things that have happened to them as they were customers and patrons at the restaurant, which is super fun.